Welcome to another SmartQA musing, which is a gentle flurry of interesting thoughts. And today, what I want to muse about is something that we are all familiar with, which we probably do, but probably an interesting way to look at it. The notion of a tester's compass, kind of finding your knot. I'm sure all of us intuitively do this, but I found this very interesting when I was thinking about this idea, and I thought it would be probably interesting to talk about it. Now let's see what that primarily means. Most often when we start testing complex systems in the limited time, which is what we do probably day in and day out. And what do we have? Not necessarily the perfect of the spec, not necessarily the fact that we have got an ample amount of time or resource. We're always under a certain amount of pressure. So when you're dropped into a complex system with limited time, unclear specs, and pressure to deliver, what really guides you? How do we work? Is it a checklist? Is it some documentation like strategy and so on and so forth? And most often an answer will be partially yes. But then, I guess, if I have to dig deep, this is probably what most of us would probably say. There is something internal, there's something like a compass that I have that points to what matters. And that somehow drives me to be able to validate, be able to tackle the situation, which is limited time, unclear specs, and pressure to deliver. And that's what we're doing. And therefore, using that as an idea and just delving into it a little deeper and asking, what do we mean by a compass and what could it mean? And probably analyzing it a little more deeply and hopefully using that idea to improve our own personal practices. That's really where this musing is all about. But typically, whenever we want to navigate someplace, in this case, we are navigating the act of validation. What is necessary? Probably a map, right? We all know that a map is a fundamental prerequisite for navigation. Now, whether you are going on a long trip by car or whether you are hiking someplace, whatever. You look at it from a journey perspective, a map gives you a specific route, a route, whatever, to make your way to the destination. But there's also a very interesting saying that we use, especially when we run, and when we run long distances in trail runs, or when we cycle over a longer distance, could be a few hundreds of kilometers nonstop, which is something that I enjoy doing. And the statement that we have in any of these kinds of sports is map is not the terrain. What does that mean? For example, when I go on a long distance cycle ride, we look at the maps to find out, okay, how is the route? What kind of roads and surface? What kind of elevations? What kind of food joints along the way? Of course, what kind of weather? And so on. And then we make plans. We say, oh, okay, here is a high elevation piece. So there's a lot of climbing. So maybe we need to rest here. We need to refill water here. We need to eat food here. We need to not go at a particular point in time, and so on. The same thing is applicable while running too. You put together a strategy and a plan based on a map. So you study the map, and that's what we do. But then when we make a statement, a map is not the terrain, what does it mean? It simply means map is a bit of theoretical. It can help you analyze, but when you actually are dropped into the terrain, the map might seem to indicate when you analyze, it's not too bad, meaning elevations are doable. But when you actually go there, you find it's not true. It's a series of little up and down, up and down, up and down. So it kind of saps you. Or sometimes the map seems to indicate, oh, that's a fairly long climb. And then when you go there, you find it's not as bad. It's kind of gentle, but then it goes for a long time. So we need to understand the difference between the notion of a map and the idea of a compass. And a compass is something that you hold in your hand during the journey. And that gives you a general sense of direction, but it gives you a lot more choices and flexible paths to get there. It helps you be in the context. whereas map is a priori. I'm not saying map is not necessary. Maps are very essential. But then map is not the terrain. So you need a compass. So keeping this idea that there is a map and there is a compass, and in fact, I think many years ago, when I was doing an interview with Anuj magazine, and we were talking about growth, personal growth in an organization. And when I was doing the interview, he actually talked about this. He talked about the map versus compass philosophy in the context of growth, right? Is somebody going to give you a clear map of your growth in the organization? Or is it a compass that you have to be equipped with and therefore be prepared? So I found that analogy very interesting when he actually shared, which I think was many years ago. So much like this, in the context of testing, I'm trying to put. So the difference is one gives you a specific route, another gives you a general direction. One gives you a way to make clearer idea maybe to the route to the destination. Other gives you choices and flexible parts because you got to adjust, improvise as you go. So keeping this idea in mind, let's kind of rephrase, if you will, what we do. The act of assurance, quality assurance, is not about execution. It's not about writing something, creating a wonderful plan, creating a wonderful document, executing it, automating it, whatever form. It's not just that. It's really navigation. And when it comes to navigation, not necessarily all maps in some sense, or most maps that are given to us are probably not as complete. There is no perfect spec. There is no clarity in a few things that we have. So there is a certain degree of imprecision that has to be contended with. And therefore, it is in some sense incomplete. So what do? We navigate. Given the particular context, when you set sail, you navigate around the ambiguity. We navigate across the assumptions. We navigate through incomplete specs. We navigate with the specs under shifting priorities. And that's how we, I think, constantly ensure that with the compass like idea, we navigate better, not driven only by the map. So does it mean we can discard the map idea and only navigate to the compass? Maybe not, because you see, like as Eisenhower said long back, planning is important, not the plan, not following the plan. That what does it say? It simply meant that it is necessary for us to analyze, plan, figure out, know what's going to possibly happen, hypothesize various situations, maybe outline this, document it, put together methods to solve those issues or circumvent those problems or preempt some of those problems. But then when you actually get into the field, things are different, and that's why the map is not a terrain, and therefore you need to improvise. And if I've done some work in terms of planning for certain situation, my improvisation will be better. And therefore, with the aid of a compass-like idea, we actually can execute the plan better. So it's important to understand that, they both are equally interesting, but believing that map alone, a detailed map alone will not work, right? And that's the idea that we're trying to look at, which I'm sure all of us resonate with, because we know that a lot of things, what was given as a spec, what is told to us is quite different from what is real, and therefore we improvise. And that's the idea that I'm calling it as a tester's compass. And how do you stay true north every time? That means going towards the goal, right? So therefore we don't really just test. We decide what is worth testing and constantly adjust. And those decisions that we do to figure out what to test and what to defer or what not to do, etc., decide what is worth it, is driven in some sense by our compass. And those decisions reveal how our compass is tuned, right? And that's the idea that I'm trying to kind of talk about. So the question then is, what do you mean? What shapes this compass? Because compass seems to be some abstract thing that's in my head, a compass in my head, What shapes this? I'm sure you appreciate some of these. Experience. So your compass in your head, which shapes your testing navigation of the journey of testing, is certainly driven by experience. So, this broke before like this. this is how it broke. So I kind of become more sensitive to look at those. Or it's my intuition. Intuition is something that you have deep down, something that's inside, unexplainable, seemingly illogical, like something doesn't feel right. And that intuition is built upon. It's very personal in nature, right? It's something that we build upon. The sense of risk, like we say, what happens if this fails? Being very, in some sense, negativistic, pessimistic. What happens if this fails? Which truly is a good hallmark for typical project managers, because project managers always ask, what if something goes wrong? And they always have alternates. So the notion of, in this case, pessimism from a sense of risk, right? And that helps you in some ways to navigate better, right? And I'm quite sure you appreciate it in the physical world. You're always asking, if you're going up, if you're going on the road, if you're going on the highway, or if you're going on the trail, you always ask, what if that particular area is not as hard? What if the leg goes down? What if, the bushes have some poisonous stuff? So you always are in that kind of a mode. I hope you get that idea. Empathy, right, which I think we appreciate in terms of saying, what does it mean? You're constantly looking at it from the end user standpoint, and you're saying, would he or she be confused? Would she or she be happy? And therefore, that's a notion, an element of the compass, so to speak. The awareness of how it is built, the notion of saying, do I really understand the internal systems? Do I understand how it is composed? And therefore appreciate its fragility, right? Or I'm sure you must have also read the book, Anti-Fragility, right? Which is basically trying to say how to make it stronger. So you're probably getting a better sense. So you have certain soft aspects like experience and intuition and risk sense and empathy. Now we're getting a little bit of hard aspects of design awareness and business impact, right? And business impact is more like saying, how does it affect something? So for example, okay, this one affects some pricing logic, or this one affects some report generation, this one affects something else. And therefore, these quote unquote the elements of these are the ones which in a way shape our internal tester's compass. Compass is a very powerful word because we use it in very many so we say moral compass, right? So we say, if I have a good moral compass, then I probably will behave well ethically in a lot of systems. You study that in philosophy, sociology, and so on. We are adapting the similar idea in the context of assurance. Now, how do you know the compass is good? How do you know it is kind of always pointing to the right direction, the true north? When you actually catch something, you find something, you find an anomaly, you spot an interesting observation, which other people didn't see. So your compass is still very strong, right? Or you skip a case. That means, you created a map and you say, this is what I should be doing. But then you landed up at the place, you say, hey, maybe I shouldn't do that because it doesn't seem to be adding a lot of value, or maybe it's not that important. So you kind of make a judgment call. So that you catch something when somebody didn't find it, or you plan for it, but you deliberately decide to skip it because you think it's of not great value. And you exactly know when to stop the probing because you say, hey, I think I know. I'm exploring, I'm probing, I'm trying to understand, I'm digging, I'm doing a lot of stuff. And there comes a time while you're doing this act, you say, okay, it's time to stop. Let's not waste any more time because I know enough. I know enough for what I need at this point in time. And therefore, you know when to stop probing. So when these happen, you know that your tester's compass is pretty strong. It is kind of pointed in the right direction, right? And it is therefore the true north. Now, what happens if it is misaligned? It can have wobbles, right? And what do you mean by wobbles? It's pulled by pressure. It's affected by noise, external noises, or uncertainty. So, what do they result in? How do you know it is wobbly? How do you know it is right? Now, I'm sure you know that in the ship's navigation, and when compass was came in, and obviously compass was one of the key instruments in navigating a ship on the open seas. Now you know that the sea is rough sometimes, calm sometimes, and buffets the entire ship, and therefore there is a lot of shake. How do you know the compass is not wobbling? What helps you to do that? I think you must have heard of that equipment called gimbal, Gimbal, which is like an interesting contraption on which the compass is mounted. And that ensures that the compass is always stable. And without the gimbal, a lot of things wouldn't work, be it the ship's navigation or earlier the navigation in the plane. Now, of course, we've got GPS, which is digital, but I'm talking about the original compass, which is mechanical equipment. So how do we know that is misaligned, and what can we do later? What does that mean? It means we are chasing cases or edge cases that we think are interesting, but they don't matter. So sometimes you go off and say, this is a very interesting edge case. And then you find that, hey, you didn't realize that it's once in a blue moon. Why are we doing it? It seems very academic. Or somehow miss something very obvious, which somebody else finds out simply because you're a little defocused. Or somebody comes and tells you this is more urgent, focus on this area, and you kind of sway from that, swayed by others' urgency, not your clarity. Right? So when these kinds of stuff happen, you know that your compass is probably misaligned, it's wobbly. And therefore, what do? We have to have our internal gimbal to kind of get back to the true north. So these are just ideas that I'm musing about to kind of look at it from a typical journey aided by the compass, and then see how do we react in the real world. Now, ultimately, a compass aligned to the system, and when you say aligned, you actually ensure that the compass is constantly aligned magnetically to the magnetic north, and it is useful. When is it useful? So when does compass help you the best? One, when it is tuned to the system structure. That means you know how it is built, you know what the system is, you know the internal aspects and so on. So it's kind of tuned in some sense to the structure of the system as to what it's supposed to deliver. And then it respects the context of the business in which the system is deployed. And it constantly, in some sense, adapts to the evolving risk. That means we are probably from the context that we are kind of constantly adjusting it, and that's what is continuous alignment. So we talked about, in some sense, the elements towards what it takes from a perspective of map versus compass, and then moved on later into looking at it as what it takes to do this piece, and then we looked at misalignments, and that's where we are right now. And finally, it is about a good balance between curiosity and pragmatism. Because as testers, as engineers, we like to do technical, we like to be very curious, we like to do a lot of things, right? But then we have to know it has to be balanced with realism, being pragmatic. Right? What really helps us to constantly and continuously stay true north by aligning is probably the better understanding of the terrain. The more you understand the terrain, the more the compass sharpens. What do you mean by that statement? It simply means that I have studied the terrain, created a map initially, created a route in a map. And as I navigate the journey, I'm constantly sensitive to the terrain and be able to use the information that I've gleaned by my earlier study and marry it to where I am, and therefore I'm able to understand the gap between what I thought it was and what it is, and therefore constantly and continuously adjust. That is what this statement kind of implies. The more you understand the terrain, the more your compass sharpens. So that's why to a large degree. Smart assurance is to a large degree based on the notion of clarity. Are you getting continuously, are you constantly enhancing, in some sense, the clarity? It doesn't mean you're clear. It just means you're improving your clarity, right? And that's really what it is. So how do I know? How's my compass? What can help me? Maybe by asking some of these questions. These are not necessarily the most conclusive questions, but I'm quite sure it will give you a sense of how to go about it, because it's a very personal thing. Like whenever you see a new screen, for example, if it's a UI, or if you see a new feature, whatever it is, whatever entity, what is the first thing that you test? How do you proceed? So helping you to reflect on that question and finding your answer will help you, in some sense, know how good your compass is. Or when somebody reports an issue, maybe you or maybe somebody else reports an issue, what happens? What do you do? Do you just fix it? Do you look at other things? So what do you really do? Where do your eyes go when a bug is reported? That's an indication of how your compass is behaving. And what makes you stop testing and say, this is enough? And the answers to some of these reflective questions are, in some sense, a mechanism to judge how good your compass looks like. As always, I don't think there is a definitive answer. There is no published definitive answer, but I think it's a very interesting open questions that help us judge our compass. And finally, what kind of bugs do you instinctively look for? Some of these are interesting questions. And I'm quite sure if you want, you can probably come up with a few more if you like, but bottom line, I think you get the drift. How do I know the compass? How do I ensure, therefore, I can align? How do I ensure that I'm sensitive, right? And these are, in some sense, signatures of how your compass is working. Right? So given, for example, a system, I'm quite sure you would agree that if multiple testers, in this case 2 testers, testing a system, may not always converge on the same journey. They may take completely different paths to the end goal of validation. So a person may test quite differently, another person may test quite differently. And if you look at how they have gone across the entire journey of validation, it will be very different. Now, as engineers, we sometimes wonder, or we will think about, is it correct? Should we not be consistent? Should we not follow the same path? And should we not processize it? Right? And that's the question to answer. And please, therefore, don't think of this as a flaw, but think of it as the beauty of the craft. Because what really matters is the awareness of the compass, of your compass, how it points and why it points, so that you take a route number 1, another person takes a route number 2, but then all of them arrive, hopefully, at the same destination, right? And therefore, that compass is what makes it very unique. And all we do as a craft of testing is to constantly refine that compass, make it more sensitive, help it be constantly aligned. And of course, also we need, in addition to the compass, the ability to create good maps, which is where methodologies and practices come into picture, aided by processes and tools, right? So as we come to the quote unquote the conclusion of this musing, look at it. Tools change, processes change, but your compass is little deep down. That evolves, and the compass, which is basically your sense of where to look, when to trust, what to ask, is constantly evolving. Right? It does not change dramatically, but everything else is changing. And that's what it is. And it evolves with every test that you probably run, with every mistake that you probably make, with every bug you trace back to its source, right? And the smarter your compass is, the less you need a map. That's interesting statement, isn't it? I started off with the idea of map, and I said, hey, maybe maps necessary, isn't it? And then now we're slowly veering towards more a compass-oriented journey where we say, if your compass is really, really smart, then maybe I don't need a map. And that's truly when we have achieved in some sense or come to a point when we are really a craftsman. I may need less preparation time a priori. I probably will be able to do it much better on the go, but that takes effort. You don't become a craftsman overnight, right? It takes an enormous amount of doing and probably making a lot more mistakes and learning from each one of them. So ultimately, the intention of any good practice of testing is to fine tune that compass, is to constantly sharpen the compass, make it much more smarter so that you can deal with it far more quickly. And that is absolute agility. Thank you so much.